This video is sponsored by The Book. For quite a while now, I had the idea of a space marine that is riding a dinosaur, a champion of the chapter that has defeated this incredible beast in one-on-one combat and became worthy of this title. If the space marine is successful in defeating this horrible dinosaur, a Thunderhawk will essentially swoop in, pick it up, and bring it over for modifications. Before I would put a space marine on this dinosaur, I would first have to drill out the massive holes where the new exoskeleton would now go, which was not an easy task. As I was drilling out these holes, I did notice that unfortunately the drill bit was slowly coming out of the rotary tool, which made me a little bit nervous. For all of the mechanical and the exoskeleton parts, I opted in to use the extra armature knight I had laying around. The big benefit here is that a lot of these exposed parts that are not covered by armor look like just very generical mechanical bits, so they'll be absolutely perfect. I just need to make sure that I send away all the damage and the little imperfections that I've created when I was trying to separate the two pieces. And with that, the first piece of the exoskeleton was now ready to go inside. And this is where I ran into my first problem, because what appeared to be a relatively flat surface of the leg could not have been the furthest thing from that, especially the transition from the hip to the area of the knee. As a result, about an hour later, when I finally created the perfect hole, it actually looked absolutely ridiculous, especially since I had to do a little bit of a cheat. The bevel you see around the hole gives me a lot more room into how I can actually position the exoskeleton bit, especially as I really wanted to match the directional movement of the leg itself. The part was never going to blend in seamlessly, so if I can follow the motion of the leg and match it with this part, at least they'll feel like they're part of the same model. But this of course meant that I'll have to fill in the gaps that I've now created with a little bit of scar tissue, also known as quick putty. In order to survive the 40k universe, creatures in it must be incredibly exaggerated in their power in order to even stand a chance. So I will give this dinosaur an absolutely incredible healing factor, which will be of course responsible for this absolutely horrendous looking scar tissue that is trying to overtake the mechanical bits. I even came up with a little bit of interesting lore that after this creature is captured, the chapter sends out a bunch of scouts to essentially hunt for a secondary creature that secretes a very special saliva that cancels the regenerative powers so the Adeptus Mechanicus can perform the operations. And the scout that found the creature will be marked as the squire of the rider. Now, even though my sculpting skills are absolutely horrendous, I did find this crystal to be incredibly useful in trying to create these very specific grooves as if the skin is trying to move with the metallical parts. And eventually, I got something that I was quite satisfied with. Now, this Carnosaur model usually has this very big plate that goes on top of the head, but as I didn't have it, I came up with a much better idea. To use this armor panel that got left over from one of my bigger knights and attach it onto the head area. And to prep the area, I had to give this dinosaur probably the best scratch that he has ever gotten. To ensure this feels a little bit less like an armor panel, I started by creating a lot of these beveled edges to remove the very sharp corners. The cheeks of the model did have these very specific marks left over that just simply did not match the rest of the model, so I had to make sure that I remove them and try to replace them with something else. As part of my attempt to make this feel like an actual Servitor helmet, I started attaching a bunch of different bits to make it seem like there's some sort of cooling coils that are not coming out of the head area. This was also when I got a pretty cool idea to give this helmet a plume, something that you would see on a horse, which really helped the whole area feel like proper head armor. And next up, it'll be attaching the side-mounted las guns. I'm sure you've noticed today's video is utilizing a whole lot of different kits, and that is in part thanks to the sponsor of today's video, The Book, the ultimate guide to rebuilding civilization that is filled with over 400 pages of beautiful illustrations exploring the human history of significant inventions and the fascinating journey through the ages. Additionally, I personally found that the book is also a great source of inspiration, as I found this very interesting page about mixing your own pigments. That's something I want to try in a future video, because the idea of creating your own paint from different things and then using it to paint something sounds really cool. Not to mention, every single time you open this book and hold it in your hands, you sort of feel like a wizard because it is absolutely enormous. Not to mention, incredibly beautiful. It literally feels like I'm about to cast some sort of a spell, which feels quite appropriate as some of the illustrations can go from magical to borderline dieselpunk grimdark. And so far, I've been genuinely very impressed. So if you think this book is for you, or you think it'll be a great gift for somebody, make sure to check it out. There'll be links in the description, and additionally, there's also going to be a discount code, so make sure to check out the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization. And back to the video. One of my earliest models, the Torex Prime, came with this very interesting weapon called the Hotshot Volley guns. Very heavy lasers that are capable of shooting incredibly fast. The main reason I went with this option rather than a bolter is that this way I have a reasonable explanation as to how the weapons are getting recharged without the Space Marine having to jump down and manually reload something like a bolter. And when the Space Marine wants this dinosaur to bite someone, he simply retracts the weapons, allowing this Techno Rex to go absolutely wild. Initially, I also took one of the extra knight helmets and essentially sanded it down to a smooth surface. I really thought it made a very interesting lower jaw part of the armor, but I simply couldn't get over the slit in the helmet, so in the end ended up scrapping this idea. Now, to create the saddle for where the Space Marine is going to be sitting, I found the old throne that came with the model. Initially, I thought I'd place the Space Marine right on top of the dinosaur, but he'd have to be doing the splits the entire time. This is also when I realized that I could use one of my Outriders because he's already essentially in the perfect sitting position. It's just a bit unfortunate as it's a push-to-fit model, so the pipes are attached to his feet. Now, a problem I kept thinking about is how exactly am I going to control the Servitor, because just sitting on top of a saddle isn't going to make it obvious when the Servitor has to shoot its lasers, swipe its claws, or any of the other features. So to make this happen, I had the idea to use the original handlebars from the Outrider that'll be connected to a steering column that'll go inside of the dinosaur. This way, he has all of the buttons and controls, even has the radar in the middle, and to make the dinosaur jump, all he has to do is grab the handlebars, push down on them, bring him back up, and the dinosaur will leap into the air. It's a dinosaur-powered pogo stick. Something about this armature piston essentially made me feel like it would make a really good steering column. But I couldn't get over the idea that a piston would be going up and down, so I thought, why not make it into an actual feature, so that the Space Marine could essentially use it to jump the T-Rex. And I really wanted to keep the saddle separate from the T-Rex, especially as it'll make my life a hell of a lot easier when I'm painting, so I made sure to drill out the area in such a way that I'll be able to easily insert it afterwards. Then I removed the back support section of the saddle as it was getting in the way of the power pack. Thought that perhaps I could use this to my advantage and attach several of the armature bits to make it feel a little bit more sci-fi. I chose to keep the area underneath relatively hollow. This would allow me to easily remove the saddle without having to worry any of the parts accidentally hitting the scales on the dinosaur. But at the same time, I wanted an additional visual connection, so I perfectly measured up this cable and cut it exactly to scale so that when I glue it, it'll appear as if it's connecting into the dinosaur. However, I can still remove the saddle without any issues. And as this is the luxury trim of the Saddle 4000, I did provide some additional padding so that our Space Marine will have a much smoother time riding this dinosaur. And it's definitely not so that I'll have a much easier time attaching the Space Marine onto the saddle. When I removed the side pipes, I was left with these relatively flat areas that really bothered me. So I had the idea to use a smaller piston from the armature to create the pedals so our Space Marine has a much easier time controlling the dinosaur. And more importantly, the feet are no longer just floating in the air, but are now actually connected to the saddle. This was also the time to finally replace the head with something that will be much more matching of a champion. And while I tested different options, I finally landed on something that would be perfect. Well, almost, as it was missing a very important part of any champion that is riding a massive T-Rex. A beautiful and absolutely matching plume. And it never stops to amaze me how much of a difference a single part can make, as he now had an entirely different feel to him. Which is also why when I got to my original idea of going with a one-handed bolter, it just didn't really feel right. So I tried several other variations, but I knew what I had to do. As the horse theme of cavalry kept following this miniature throughout every single step, why stop there now? So I gave him this awesome sword, almost as if he's yelling charge into battle. I also thought it'd be neat to give this guy just a few different additional satchels, which is also when I thought, why not give him a bigger gun too? Now, even though this is technically the Leagues of Votan weapon, it looks generic enough that it could simply be a bolter inside of an ornate sheath. Now, I'm sure you've noticed that the arms do not have an exoskeleton on them, and that is because I was really not sure if I was gonna add them right up until the end. Even though it might seem relatively simple on the video, when I was actually making the legs, it was incredibly challenging and took an exceptionally long amount of time. To make this even more challenging, the arm area would have this additional connection that I really wasn't sure I could make. As the arm does move in a lot of different areas, I did have to remove some of these additional pistons that I originally thought would look absolutely incredible. Trying it on the model and also just rotating it without it to figure out if it would work visually. And unfortunately, as I'm a clumsy idiot, I did accidentally drop it, resulting in one of the fingers breaking off, but I cleaned up the area and attached a new prosthetic. Fortunately for the Servitor, the Space Marines have a very generous health plan. So I attached some additional cables and I just went for it. I really felt like it would balance out the model much better if the exoskeleton was present in both limbs rather than only at the back. And while my concerns were definitely warranted, I think in the end it was absolutely worth it, as it just made the model feel a lot more interesting. And as the final finishing touch, I also added just a few different cables around the entire model. And because a regular base would not fit such an awesome creation, I found something really interesting online. And for the first time on this channel, I finally decided to pin a model, particularly because this thing is absolutely enormous and balancing on one leg is going to be an exceptional challenge. And I was so surprised how sturdy it was that I actually feel quite confident that it can keep all the parts separated so that when I get to painting it, I'll have a much easier time. And with that, the final cherry on top. Now, making this project was incredibly difficult, and it is the biggest thing I've ever attempted with a lot of parts and a lot of modifications. So for the next video, I'll be painting this incredible creature and trying to make the diorama even more awesome. And again, thank you to the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization, for sponsoring this video. Make sure to check it out. Again, there's gonna be links in the description.